Hello, everyone. Welcome. Today is Wednesday, the 22nd. It is so close to the conference. The conference is in like 2 weeks. So we'll talk about that in a second. But yes, so first of all, welcome everyone. So today is Lunch and Learn. So what is Lunch and Learn? It's never lunch for me because I'm on the West Coast. So for me right now, it's like breakfast and learn. Dr. McGrath is on Central Time, right?
Central.
Yeah, so yours is like a
brunch and
pre-lunch
learn.
and learn, like brunch and learn.
Yeah,
East Coast is lunch
Brunch
and learn. And then I think for like other countries, it's like dinner and learn. So just eat something and learn, or don't eat something and learn. But that's where the title comes from. But what this show is really about is it gives us an opportunity. Liz and I, Dr. McAville and I do live streams every first, third, and if there's a fifth Wednesday, that are just ask the experts, answering your general questions, discussing general OCD topics. But our Lunch and Learn, it gives us an opportunity to bring on an expert and to really dive deep into a subtype or an OCD related topic. And so today we're going to be talking about Real Event OCD, False Memory OCD. What is it? What are some of the different things about it? The kind of like nuances or the things that make it different than other subtypes. I know this is a popular topic because we always get questions in the chat about it. So this is something that you, the audience, has really kind of come to us and said, look, we really want to know more about this topic. And so we're excited to dive in. So before I introduce the guest and we start, we always have some general live stream announcements. First and foremost, we always have to say this just so that everybody knows that this live stream is for educational purposes only. This is not intended to replace therapy. If you have treatment-related questions, please work with your provider or contact a local clinician. You can use the IOCDF's online resource directory at iocdf.org/find-help to locate a trained clinician near you. The IOCDF is not a crisis hotline. So if you're in a crisis or you're feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room or call 911 or the suicide prevention hotline at 800-273-8255. We want to create a safe space and be kind and respectful to everyone. So at the end of the day, we're all here to support one another. And then a note that this is being broadcast on several social media platforms and is being recorded. I want to say before we jump in, so in 2 weeks, the 27th annual OCD conference, which is going to be in Denver in July, it is a special event. The entire OCD community will be there, related disorders, individuals, treatment providers, researchers, families, supporters. So go to iocdf.org/OCDcon. And our guest will be there. And I'm so excited because I don't think I've seen you in person in forever, right?
Been a long time, Chris. Yeah.
Very long. So, back then, I mean, we were in horse and buggies. No, I'm just kidding.
Right.
Not long. But super super excited about that. So come meet us, come talk to us. We'd love to answer questions. Before we start, make sure you put your questions in the chat. So we're going to focus on Real Event OCD, False Memory OCD, but we can generally answer general OCD questions as well. So please put questions in the chat. We'll get to all of them. My name's Chris Trondsen. I'm an individual with OCD and related disorders, and then I am one of the IOCDF's lead advocates, vice president of OCD Southern California, and now I'm full circle treating OCD in Costa Mesa. And I'm excited to introduce my guest. And I didn't even ask for a bio, and maybe he gave a bio, but I've just known this guy for so long. So Dr. Patrick McGrath, to me, is one of those people that has really spearheaded the OCD treatment and shaped it to what it is today. Just all his work that he's done in educating people with OCD, training clinicians at NOCD to treat OCD, which is so important, speaking at conferences, educating individuals, family members, but also therapists on OCD and treatment, helped create a residential where people can get OCD treatment and substance use disorder treatment at the same time, which is much needed. Just an all-around amazing guy and somebody I love doing these live streams with. And one day we're going to take it on the road or do something at the conference live. I don't know, but it's so much fun to be with this guy. So without further ado, from NOCD and from just being an all-around amazing person, hi, Dr. McGrath. Do you like me to call you Patrick, Dr. McGrath, PG, PBG?
Anything but Pat. That's all. I don't. Okay. Whatever.
I feel like if I called you Pat, you'd have to be like, look at either Shane Pat. Like, I don't know. Very kind of Irish thing. Yeah, but we got to come up with like a rap name, like DJ PBJ.
My rap name is PB McG, just so you know.
Ooh, I like that. Okay. Eminem is shaking in his boots. So he's literally like, I quit. there's this OCD treatment provider, just too awesome. Well, I'm so happy to have you here. Let's have fun. Let's have a good time. Let's educate the public. So the reason I really like discussing, kind of, real event OCD, sometimes people say false memory OCD, sometimes people mix the two, separate the two. But the reason I like discussing this is because I think for a lot of people going through this, they don't resonate when they see things on other subtypes. Like, it feels very different. One thing I hear a lot is, but I was there, it happened, or I remember it happening. How can I trust my memory? So before we kind of jump into that, can you just give us an example, just kind of like a definition, a little explanation on this subtype and maybe how you often see it manifesting in patients?
Sure. I mean, with all types of OCD, it's doubt, right? So let's keep that in mind. And in this kind of instance, it's doubt about something that's happened, and if I remember it correctly, or what if I forgot something about it? Do I really know the way that it actually happened, or did I just maybe imagine it and maybe it went worse than it really did, and I just don't know about it, or I've forgotten about it, or I've put it out of my head, or maybe I think that I did something well, but what if it turns out that I didn't? One of my favorite examples of it is treating people who talked about having done drugs somewhere many years ago and fearing that in leaving some drug residue on the place where they did their drugs, what if someone else's belongings touched that spot where the residue might have been, and then went home and the drug residue fell off onto the table, and then the next morning the family ate at that table and they had put some bread or something on the table, and the bread absorbed the drug residue, and then the family ate it and then got a taste for drugs, and now the whole family is addicted to drugs all because of me, right? Mm-hmm. And so here we have a real event, right? This person did these drugs. And now what is the worst case scenario around those? So there's where you would have a real event experience. And then a false memory experience being that, I know that I drove home that night on that road, and years later I found out there was an accident on that road where somebody lost their life. How can I guarantee that it wasn't the night that I drove on that road and it wasn't me? Because I know that I did this, but I don't have the guarantee that something bad didn't actually happen, right? So these types of experiences. I've even had people call the police on themselves because they even knew that they didn't do something, but their OCD kept telling them, but what if you did do it and you just don't remember that you did it? So one person called the police on himself because he had heard there was a hit and run in his town. And even though his car didn't match the description and there was no damage to his car, and he hadn't actually driven that day, he still called the police to say it might have been him. And maybe he did it, but he forgot about it. And so it could have been an event that occurred, but it then went out of his head. So in the off chance, it's probably best to report myself just in case.
Yeah, no, I think I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's one thing that's kind of scary about this subtype, because same thing, I've worked with clients that have actually called the police or hired private investigators, but to literally investigate themselves and to go through things in the past. What are some general kind of like worries, obsessions, fears, doubts that you often see in this subtype? And then after you kind of complete that, what are common compulsions? I know you just gave an example, but maybe just in general, like what are some of the typical worries, concerns, and then those triggers and compulsions that people engage in?
It reminds me a little of some of the work John Hirschfield and I do a lot together on the moral scrupulous piece. There's the notion that somehow, some way, somewhere I've done something wrong and it's going to catch up to me and I'm going to be at fault for it and in trouble, and I'll be judged or evaluated in some way because of this thing and my lack of memory of it or lack of knowledge about it that I should have known about it. So one of the things that you see, Chris, and I'm sure you've seen this too, is a lot of reliving of the experience, trying to repeat it over and over in my head, and then running alternate scenarios. Now, what if this is what happened? And then I would have done this and that would have happened that way. In fact, I one time had someone who I saw in the morning for a session. And when I went out to my car in the evening, they were in the parking lot. And I was wondering why they were still there. And I knocked on the window, and it turned out they were reviewing our entire session, wondering, had they told me everything exactly the way that it was supposed to be told to me, and the right way? Because if they had said something wrong and then I took it a different direction, then they weren't going to be treated for what they needed to be treated for. So what if they had said this? Maybe I would have said that, which would have led to this, and all these permutations that they were running about it. And it's the analysis paralysis kind of experience then that happens in these types of situations where people are so stuck and almost afraid to do anything else, because now I have this idea that I don't know everything I do, and I don't remember everything I do, and maybe I don't remember everything the right way that I've actually done it. And what if I do bad things and I don't know I do them, and maybe it's safer if I just stay out of society or away from people or something of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm hearing from you, and I'm sure everybody else is hearing, is a lot of the focus of this is like past events. So typically it's past. And, I think that's what makes a subtype unique. It's not the only subtype like that, but traditionally a lot of our OCD fears are future stuff. What if this makes me sick? What if I hit somebody with my car? What if I go to hell? But what's unique, about the subtype is a lot of past stuff. Can you explain, because I think one thing that tricks a lot of individuals with OCD is in life, when we're going through school, when we're watching like a detective show, it makes sense to do research. Like the more somebody studies a topic, the more they become an expert. The more they investigate a cold case, the more information they get. So it makes sense that if you think you hit somebody with your car, or, a big thing that I saw in my practice is where, during the Me Too movement, a lot of people reviewing their past college experiences. Like, did I ever take advantage of someone? Did I not get, full, somebody fully like engaging and saying yes? How come with OCD it's different? Because like in real life, if I'm going to research a past event, learn about history, learn about the Greeks, I'm going to come with you with more knowledge. With OCD, it's like the more they go in the past, the more confused they are.
Yeah, well, you can never give OCD good information that it will believe, because it will doubt it all the time. I mean, it is the doubting disorder, right? So then if you do find something that's negative, then OCD is like, oh yeah, it's got to be that, right? Because OCD loves a worst case scenario. And then it sends you down those rabbit holes all the time about those worst case scenario types of experiences. So, you can't give OCD enough information. OCD is insatiable, so it will always demand more. So you just can't do enough research, number one. And number two, you can't find enough research that would ever be positive enough for OCD to say, okay, thank you, I think we're good now. I've finally decided that nothing bad actually happened, so I'll go with that and all will be well, right? So you've got two things working against you right off the bat there. Never being able to know enough, and never being able to be positive enough as well that you could neutralize OCD. So that leaves you only with one route to go, which is finding things that are going to be negative and then having to investigate them as well too. And then you just add more and more things to it, which means more and more holes to dig and more things to find as you're digging more and more holes. And inevitably, all you're going to do is just create this maze. And then you're going to start looping back around. And then, wait a minute, did I think about this one enough last time? So now I'm going to have to do it all over again. And you'll never get enough.
Yeah. And I think what's so insidious about OCD as well is it's always like, you're this close, like just go a little bit further and you're going to have that aha moment. You'll get that clarity and move on. What do you see is usually, what is somebody with OCD with a subtype? What are they trying to search for? What is the OCD promising that the light at the end of the tunnel will be? And then boom, they don't have to ever obsess about this or compulse about it anymore.
Well, there could be a few things, right? One could be, I will find that I've done something wrong, and then I'll turn myself in to get the justice that I actually deserve. Otherwise, I'm being a disingenuous person living in a world having done something horrible and not paying the price for it. So I need to make sure that if I have done something wrong, that I discover that I've done it, that I do pay the price for having done it. So that can be one of the things that happens. And the other one will be potentially, if I can find things that I've done wrong, then I can use that for the future. Because here's where the future part comes in now, to make sure that I don't ever do that again, right? So OCD loves to throw things at you all the time. Hey, remember this, don't forget this, don't forget this, don't forget this. And using that as a way to make sure you don't make the mistakes of the past ever again. So you get the quote unquote advantage that OCD is going to tell you of, oh, I'm going to stop this from ever happening again by reminding you of every bad thing that's ever happened. But let's just do a good inventory here to know every bad thing that's happened and make sure we didn't overlook anything. So there's where you get the false memories and the real event kind of stuff that you're always having to investigate those types of things.
Yeah, can you also talk a little bit about dreams? Because one thing that I hear from clients a lot is that, they'll have like a dream and then they'll say, wait, was that, a subconscious replaying of an event that I did in the past, or I dreamt that I remember certain things. So sometimes that's, not with everyone, obviously, but sometimes that's what I hear is like, did I dream about an event that really happened? And then they go into this like tunnel. So maybe touch on that briefly.
Yeah, well, there can be very vivid dreams that people wonder, they wake up in that moment for a while and don't know, did that really happen or did it not, right? And so I think OCD is probably going to go on just for safety's sake, let's say that it did happen, just in case you didn't know about it. OCD could also say, how do you know you didn't do something while you were sleepwalking or sleeping or something like that as well, too? So you can throw that into the mix of the whole experience of it, right? In terms too, I think of that idea of dreams in the world of thought action fusion. Do dreams fall into thoughts then, and therefore are dreams just as bad as a conscious thought? Because why would you have dreamt about it if you didn't really like it either? So it's another way to punish yourself through thought action fusion on something that popped into your head.
And I was going to bring that up because that's one of the things that I've seen a lot in this. I mean, obviously, thought action fusion impacts a lot of people with OCD, but that's something that I see a lot in this subtype. So can you first explain, maybe if this is the first time someone's heard the term thought action fusion, can you briefly explain that and then how that may occur in this subtype?
So thought action fusion is basically that concept of thinking something is just as bad as doing something. And frankly, we can trace this back over 1,000 years to old religious practices of the idea of, confessing in old forms of certain religions used to be about you would confess things you've actually done. And then there were some concepts about, well, if you're going to do it, wouldn't you think about it first? And so therefore, maybe we should have people confess the thoughts that they have about things. Now, they realized after about 100 years of doing that this was a really horrible idea. And they went back to just confessing the things that you've done. But in our society, in more Western societies and more Christian society kind of worlds, you've seen that this is kind of more of a worldview that thoughts are bad, right? And you could be judged for a thought. Now, I watched once a TED Talk, which was fascinating, and somebody who was an immigrant from Korea was hanging out with all of his white friends, and he was about 13, and he said, I had this amazing conversation. And now he was relating the stories in his 30s now, and he's a linguist. And he was relating this conversation. He said, all my white friends were like, hey, what if you hadn't moved here? We would have never met you before. That would have been horrible. I'm so glad you did. And he said, I went home and said to my parents, what if we'd never moved here? And he said, my parents looked at me and said, what do you mean, what if we never moved here? We did move here. What are you talking about? Almost as if that even concept of thinking that way, he was talking about it now as a linguist, was foreign to them. That just wasn't the way that they viewed the world versus the way that his white friends were viewing the world too. So there may be some cultural aspects to this too, which are absolutely fascinating. I hope that we continue to really discover and learn about. But so in parts of our culture and very much here in the US, you have this notion that thoughts are bad, right? Images are bad. Urges are bad. Well, what do you have in OCD? Thoughts or images or urges, right? So OCD is picked up on that and go, wait, these are bad? Oh, we better neutralize the heck out of them then because they're bad. And so that's what we have to do. So OCD is almost kind of built around this entire concept of if something pops into your head, it must be judged and evaluated. And if it doesn't pass the test, you're a bad person for having even allowed it to be in your head. And you should never have done it. And Chris, how many people have you and I treated who say, couldn't I just have any other thoughts but this thought? Why does it have to be this thing? Because OCD loves to pick on things that you love and enjoy and everything. So now if if you want to be able to live your life and you're just thinking, I want to be carefree and go out and do things, OCDs will be like, oh, but let's really do a look at everything that you've ever done in your life and see if you actually deserve that. Oh, I think we found a checklist of about 9,472 things we must investigate first before you're allowed to do that.
Yes. And, I was thinking while you're talking too, one thing that gets a lot of people with OCD is that, there was a book and a movement called like The Secret that was on Oprah, and it was talking about like, visualize and think about something good and it'll come into your life. And so then, even though The Secret, I would say, isn't as popular now, a lot of different like online coaches or spiritual people will say like your thoughts and what you think about is what your life looks like. It's the worst thing to tell somebody with OCD, because if they're constantly having thoughts that 11 years ago, while they were doing drugs, they think they might have hurt somebody, and then that's all they've been thinking about the last the last 2 years. It's like, okay, that whole concept of like your thoughts are what you put out into the atmosphere just absolutely get people. So in this subtype, and maybe even just in OCD in general, how does a client or how does somebody with OCD really get to the point where they can kind of separate themselves from the thoughts, in the sense that every thought I have isn't a truth, it isn't a subconscious urge that OCD is bringing to the surface? Because that's what I hear all the time is, well, why would I have this thought? There has to be something to it.
We're human, and we have noisy bodies and noisy brains, which means random crap pops into our head all the time. I watched a movie when I was a kid. It was a B movie. I don't know if you've seen it, Chris, called The Toxic Avenger. It's about a kid who was picked on a lot, and he was thrown into a vat of toxic waste, and he emerged as a rebel superhero. And he went against bullies all over the world. And at one point, he's driving in the Toxic Avenger mobile, and he sees one of the bullies crossing the street, and he says, 50 points, and he runs them over, and to this day, I can't see somebody crossing the street without thinking to myself, ooh, 50 points, and I think nothing of it because I don't have OCD. But boy, if I did, what I could see where I could go then. Why would I think that? Why did I watch that movie even? It's so stupid of me to even done that. And now I shouldn't even drive anymore because now I think about running people over and collecting points, and I think it's funny and I laugh at it, and that just shouldn't be that way because there's a right way and a wrong way to think about things. And this is absolutely the wrong way to think about it. Now I got to punish myself out of these types of thinking, and it just can go on and on for people, right? So, there's almost this notion that there is an absolutely right way to think, right? And there are absolutely right things to have pop into my head. And if anything falls out of that little band area that is the okay thoughts, then I'm a bad person. Because here's a fallacy of fallacies. All of us should be in total control of our brains. Well, that's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous, right? If anybody is at the conference and you want to see it, I will bring my conference wallet with me that I used to bring to work as well too. And if you want to see it, I have a card in my wallet that has been in there for 17 years that says, I hope my parents die tonight, please God. And there's a 666 on the card too. And the reason it's in there is because I was treating somebody 17 years ago who said, oh, I just had a bad thought and now I have to say a prayer because if I don't, my parents will die tonight. And I said, what's the thought? And it said it's about his parents getting harmed or dying. I said, okay, then I'm going to wish for my parents to die tonight and we'll see what happens. And that card is still in my wallet and my parents are still alive to this day. So for 17 years, they've dodged that statement.
It's like, take that, OCD. You're a liar. Yeah, I wanted to inform you though, with inflation, it's 75 points now when you hit.
Oh, yeah, okay, yes, yeah.
Not too many more though, even though it was all those years ago. Inflation never kind of catches up.
Yeah.
No, and an exercise that I do with my clients sometimes when they really have this like overvalue about their thoughts is I have us close our eyes and I say, what did you drive here in today? And they're like, oh, like a Corolla and stuff. I'm like, what's your dream car? And they'll describe it and they'll picture it and they'll discuss it. I'm like, I want you to envision in our parking lot now, the old car is gone and somebody brought the new car and there's a butler with a white glove and a plate and has the keys on it. And when you leave here today, it's going to be there. And I'm like, all right, you visualized it? And they're like, yes. I'm like, all right, let's look out my window. Is the car there? And they're like, but that's stupid. I know it won't be. And it's like, well, how come it can't work on the good side, but it can only work on the negative side? That if you vision have a thought of your parents dying tonight, that it has to happen. But if you envision a car in the parking lot, it doesn't. And so I just think one of my favorite things is just to treat OCD almost like it's an individual you don't like, and like poking holes in its argument. And so you've had 17 years of hole poking that you've done with that card. And so, it proves that. I want to get into the treatment about it, but I want to get Grace's question at 1204, Skyla. And it says in the live stream overview that real event OCD has to do with past actions. What does that mean? Could real event OCD have to do with past events that weren't in your control? So an experienced car accident, an experienced natural disaster, etc.
Sure. Why was I there? Why didn't I take a different route that day? Why did I decide to go hiking that day in that area? Why did I go on a vacation and to that place where there happened to be a tsunami? I had several other choices. I could have gone somewhere else. So OCD will always find a way to blame you for something, right? It doesn't matter how well something turns out or doesn't turn out. OCD is going to find a way to find some blame and give it to you.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback off of this question, thanks, Skylar, you could take it down. With this subtype, do you see that it's always around a past event that didn't happen, or is it a past event that could happen, but the details are kind of murky, or can it be both?
One thing I learned when I did a little bit of stand-up comedy, and one thing I learned was a groan is as good as a laugh, right? And I think about that in the terms of OCD too. A near miss is just as bad as a hit, right? And so all you need is even we almost. I talk a lot, Chris, and I'd love your opinion on this. Panickers do this a ton, but I think it's universal among anxious people. Anxious people live an almost life. I almost died. I almost had a heart attack. I almost passed out. I almost couldn't breathe. I almost had a stroke. I almost this. I almost that. None of these things have to actually happen to people. They just almost have to happen to people, and that's enough for them to be afraid of it.
No, 100%. I mean, with OCD, especially when I was really, really struggling, I think people who don't have OCD or anxiety and stuff, it's like when one of those things happen, it's a very positive outlook after. It's like, you'll see on a TV show or like a YouTube clip of someone almost falling off a cliff, and everybody's like celebrating, oh my God, he's safe, yay. But my head was always more so, oh my God, it was that close to happening. It's going to happen again. What are the 4,218 things that I can do to make sure it never even gets that close? And so instead of looking at it as like, oh, yes, I survived, it was more so, oh no, I was this close to being taken out. Why would I ever do that again? And that's where a lot of my avoidances came in. It's like, well, if that bad thing almost happened here, I can't go there. I can't do this. And sometimes there were grandiose things. Sometimes they weren't as, it's grandiose, but it's exhaustive because, then suddenly, it's like, I think of like a new parent that like baby protects their house, like everything, but that's how you feel with OCD. You have to baby trap your entire life to prevent that almost thing from happening again, for sure.
Yeah. The almost world is a tough world to be in, right? Because in the almost world, anything could happen, right?
Yeah.
Don't forget that in OCD, possibility equals probability.
Yeah.
So something just has to be possible. Even 0.000001. I even quote the movie Dumb and Dumber. Jim Carrey's character says to Lauren Holly, "Would you date me?" And she says, "Only if you were the last man on earth." And his response is classic. It's, "So you're telling me I've got a chance."
I love that line. That Oscar-winning film is one of my favorites. So, that Tony Award-winning, film. I love that movie. And by the way, I'm going to buy that suit when I get married, either the orange or the baby blue. So you have to have that for sure.
I want an invite to that wedding. That's all I got to say. So.
Yes, and I do have to say I've met Jim Carrey, and he's as nice as he is, because he was like growing up was like one of my heroes. And it's like, don't meet your heroes, but he was absolutely one of the nicest human beings. So it always makes it better when I watch the movie knowing that, because if he wouldn't have been nice, I would have had to separate the artist from the art. I want to jump into kind of how does somebody approach this? So let's say somebody goes to a treatment provider, they come in and they say, look, like all the information about Me Too movement on TV has really got me thinking about my college years. I remember a party I went to where I was drunk, or, I just read an article about an unsolved hit and run or murder that happened in my hometown when I lived there, and they come and they approach you. What does the treatment look like? How does somebody start to get to a point of getting some relief and reducing symptoms around the subtype?
Well, it doesn't look like let's find the answer, right? It doesn't look like let's do some more research to try to find out. And let's call everyone you ever interacted with in college and do a 7-hour interview with them to see if you ever did anything that might have even been construed in their mind as somewhat not right. It is similar to what you and I do, Chris, with everybody. We start to get people to learn how to live with doubt and uncertainty, and becoming accepting of the fact that that it is okay to not know everything. And you and I have to fight against one very common statement, which is, but I don't want to be a person who could have done this or who could do this. And it's hard to tell people that all of us are potentially people who could or have or couldn't, not ever could in the future potentially do something. I have no guarantee that I won't hit someone with my car while driving in the future. I've never done it so far, but I have no guarantee that I won't do it in the future. And yet I'm still going to drive, right? So it's moving people in that direction of, instead of trying to figure everything out in service of my OCD, which turns out to be something insatiable and means the rest of my life will be spent in service of my OCD, I'm going to work in service of living my life. And in service of living my life means to be like everyone else, which is to accept a level of doubt and uncertainty about things, but still go out and do things anyway.
Yeah. And I would say with this subtype, especially, I really kind of educate clients on mental compulsions, because sometimes they don't know that a compulsion is mental. And so, obviously the more physical compulsions are a little bit, easier to kind of conceptualize. So somebody is asking friends like from college, like, I never did anything shady, right? Or, trying to see what the make and model was, or driving back to their hometown and kind of trying to like sit in that parking lot and get a memory. But a lot of it can be rumination throughout the day. They're kind of tuning out their work. They're tuning out the movie they're watching, and they're in their head trying to like fact find. And what I always warn clients is it's kind of making like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. And then my young clients look at me and say, what is a photocopy? And then I cry, and then I quit. But I
and then you put your cassette in the player and you listen to one of your cassettes. Yeah.
And I go play Atari in the back, and I'm really pissed off. Yeah, no, but it's that thing where it's like, I tell them, I'm like, I get that it's so tempting. Like, that's the itch that you want to scratch with OCD, is if I just spend the next 15 minutes, I'll get an answer. But now it's blurrier. And the worst part is OCD is so happy to fill in the new blurs that happen when you go back and check old memories. And so now, not only did you hit one person with your car, like you drove through the mall and killed 48, like, and there's no record of it, but you could have done it and then hid the evidence. I mean, it starts to just get blown up and blown up and blown up. And so it's so dangerous to go back and try to figure it out.
Chris, how many people have come to see you and said, I'm afraid that in my past I did awesome things and I was just a wonderful person?
Right. They're like, I'm really bored on Tuesdays and thought I'd go to therapy to ask about having impressive thoughts about how amazing I was, Yeah, never. I want to throw up this question from Caitlin at 1207. She says, do you think there will ever be another therapy treatment for OCD besides ERP? I find ERP to be too difficult to me. So when you have a client come in, and this is an interesting conversation I've been having with Kim Quinlan and with Liz McInville and some other people, how do we present ERP? Like, let's say somebody comes in with this subtype. How can ERP be presented in a way that doesn't kind of scare people? Because I think a lot of times people think ERP is going to be like fear factor. So in this case, it's like, we're going to go to jail and we're going to this. I think people get really worried. How can it be presented in a way that it's like, look, this tool is actually going to help you get this relief and move on from being stuck in the past that you may have done something bad?
I think there's two approaches here, Chris. And the first one is, I want to know the goals that people have of therapy. And if the goal is to not have these thoughts anymore, then I want to really educate people on how that's not a goal that is really going to work, because OCD won't allow that as a goal, right? OCD is never going to be satisfied enough that it's going to pull those thoughts away. So first of all, the goal has to really be discussed with people. And two, I think there will always be a component of ERP in the therapy that we do for OCD. Now, you mentioned other people like Kim doing self-compassion and various things. I think we'll find that there can be some additives potentially for people who are struggling with ERP. But in the end, it's going to come down to, are we telling people they need to jump in the deep end of the pool and swim? Or are we going to teach people how to put a toe in the water and see how it feels and move on from there? And my hope is that that's what we can do for everybody, is build that gradual experience for folks so that ERP doesn't feel overwhelming and too difficult to do.
Yeah, somebody in the comments, Grace, talked about acceptance and commitment therapy. And I think a piece of that is really kind of finding your goals and what is OCD preventing you from and going towards that. But I believe that when people say, and I could be totally wrong, and the person that wrote the original question can definitely put in the chat, but I believe that when people have had ERP and have felt that it doesn't work, my guess is the person they're working with, ERP is not the treatment that they use most often in therapy. They probably see multiple different types of disorders, et cetera, because a lot of times I'll hear from clients that were really turned off from ERP. They're like, in the first session, my therapist had me do this. And it's like, no, I mean, we got to explain what's going on in the head. We got to recognize where these distortions are coming of thinking, the doubt that you've created, how OCD is kind of getting you to build this fantasy fear in your head and what you've done to buy in. But ultimately, let's say somebody has pedophilia thoughts, and because of that, they can't see their niece. To me, it's like, what the treatment is asking you to do is to work towards gradually getting to a point that you could spend your niece's second birthday with her. And so how can that be a bad therapy? How can that be something to fear? We're not going to have you look at images of children in kind of like odd circumstances that borderline illegal. I mean, us as therapists don't want to do that either. But why is going, let's go to Target. Let's walk through Target and let's go to the kids section and act like you're buying. Let's actually buy a gift for your niece. There may be children that come in, but this is part of everyday living. And what I've always said to people is, because of my work with ERP, it has helped me in my life beyond. It helped me with, dealing with the pandemic. It's helped me deal with, different things in my work life and in dating life, because what the treatment's asking you to do is say, there are going to be things in our life that make us uncomfortable because growth is uncomfortable. Let's face it so that we can learn from it and grow as a person and start to become more confident in ourselves. So my hope is anybody with this subtype or others recognize, like, what we're really just asking you to do is to kind of drop the things that OCD has been having you do for so long that it's just making the situation worse.
Everyone comes to us wanting to change, and the last thing anyone wants to do is change anything, because change is difficult. So I'm just echoing exactly what you said there, Chris. I couldn't agree more. Change is the most difficult thing that you will ever do. Even if the thing you're doing is something that you hate, like OCD rituals, they're predictable, and therefore they're known. And doing ERP can be an unknown and not very predictable maybe at first. So that's why it might be scarier to go toward the ERP route than it is to continue doing what you're doing, even if you hate doing what you're doing.
Yeah, and you can always do it slow. You can always get more education on what you're doing. So that's the other thing. Sometimes people go too big. We have a question at 12:10 from Minal. And she says, how is false memory OCD different from psychosis?
Well, in any kind of OCD, there's more of that recognition of, there's a part of me that realizes that this is getting in the way, that in doing this, I need some help with this, versus what I've seen, at least in psychosis, and I haven't done a ton with psychosis, but what I've seen in it is more of, this is just it. This is believable. This is the way it is. There's not the doubt kind of experience in psychosis that we see in the OCD experience.
Yeah, really well said. I mean, we run an intensive outpatient program, so we will get clients that are pretty severe. And when I have worked with a client that was misdiagnosed as OCD but does have psychosis, it feels very different as a clinician. The clients with OCD, with false memory OCD, they come in and they've been like living a great life, and like a thought or something they see or a trigger or a dream or something popped up. And there's doubt there, like you said, and they've tried to get answers in that doubt, and they've done that for a couple years. And now they're freaking out because they don't know if they've done it, if they haven't done it. They've also shown other signs of OCD. This isn't the first thing, Whereas I've had clients come in with psychosis, and when I'm talking to them about their psychosis, an example is like I've had clients that have said, look, the devil is inside me. I need an exorcism. They are not even open to the fact that this could be a mental disorder or that this could be intrusive thoughts. They're like, no, you don't understand. I need a religious figure, etc. So that conviction, that belief, these are ego-syntonic. This is happening to me. You don't understand. This isn't the right place for me. Versus somebody with OCD is like, I'm confused and I'm lost. And some days I'm clear, some days I'm not. So there's that flexibility and insight.
Yeah.
We have another question from, another question at 1210 from a new person named Mary from YouTube. It says, my real event OCD occurred as a result of trauma. I did things that I'm not proud of to people I love. I'm making progress processing the trauma, but the real event stuff haunts me still. So maybe kind of dissect that a little bit when there's like trauma, sure, and maybe they did do something that they're not happy about.
So then we have to talk about the ability to forgive. And we are, of course, more potentially bent to forgive others than we are ourselves. And we give other people leeway that we don't give ourselves. And we often treat other people better than we treat ourselves too. So, Mary, I would ask you this. If someone had wronged you, Mary, if we turned the page on this, right, and it had been the result that somebody had wronged you, how much would you want them to suffer for it? And how many years would you want them still to beat themselves up about the experience? And if it's not as long as what you've gone through, what I want you to consider, Mary, is what would happen then if you followed your own advice and stopped holding on to this notion that I call specialness? And specialness to me is the idea that the rules of the world apply to me differently than they do to everybody else. It's fine for other people to be forgiven. It's fine if other people have done things and have made up for it. It's not fine for me. And I still must figure out why I did it and do some kind of moral inventory and figure the whole experience out. And of course, keep it at the forefront of my mind too, to make sure that I don't ever do it again as well too. And then I must continue to also beat myself up over the fact that I did it, because how could one ever actually be forgiven for such an action?
Yeah, really, really well said. And I'm glad, Mary, that you're seeing somebody for the trauma as well, because that's one of the things that sometimes happens is people won't see somebody for the OCD or the trauma. And if both are occurring at the same time and convoluted, it's helpful to do that. We have a YouTube question from Lovelana at 1215. Why does OCD have us scrutinize ourselves in this way? Why is that such a part of the OCD, scrutinizing our actions, our past behaviors? Did we not, kind of thing?
Well, because OCD holds on to a false belief that says that you are responsible for everything that you've ever thought, every image you've ever had, every urge you've ever experienced, every thought you've ever had happen. And because of that, and then bring in the thought-action fusion, that thoughts are just as bad as actions, or images or urges are as bad as actions. That means that then you're a dangerous or bad or awful or horrible, or throw in whatever crappy adjective you want to add into that kind of experience there. And you are that because now you've become your thoughts. You've become your images. You are your urges. And only bad people have these kinds of images and urges and thoughts. So then you are a bad person. So now, Lovelana, who's also joins me on my Wednesday webinars, by the way. Good to see you.
Yay, make sure to watch it. They're great.
Yeah. Now,
Lovelana, make sure they watch yours. Yours are great.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Yes. We'll have a guest on tonight because I'm not in the office tonight. But in these kinds of cases, then you're almost shot in the foot. Well, you're not almost. You are shot in the foot before you've even started. You can't take a good first step because you've already maimed yourself by the idea that you can never be perfect. You can never be good enough, but you are supposed to be better than everybody else, right? And so all these things coming in together just leads to this constant scrutiny that we put on ourselves. Then we always fall short, right? No one with OCD has ever scrutinized themselves once and said, "Oh, look, I actually turned out pretty well in this whole experience," right? That doesn't happen. You're always last in line. And so now that you're last in line, now you got to scrutinize, well, why am I last in line? So now you're scrutinizing, and you're just going to go further and further and down the hole.
Yeah, well said. There's a double question from Manal that says, is real event OCD always worried about past events related to harm? So possibly hurting someone. Is that always what it is, or could it be multiple things?
I think it could be most likely related to harm, but it doesn't have to be physical harm. It could be emotional harm that you've caused to someone potentially. But going back also to that patient that I talked about who was worried, what if she told me something in a way that wasn't supposed to be told? She should have said something else. There was, I guess even in that instance, you might think about some psychological harm could be done, because then I would be treating her for something that shouldn't be treated because she didn't tell me something the exactly way that it needed to be told to me too. So don't think of it only as physical harm, though. It could be a mental kind of experience or a moral experience as well too.
Yeah, and a follow-up question, it's from Grace at 1216, is it always about past? So for instance, like, did I hit somebody with the car, or can it be the future? What if I cause a hit and run in the future?
I think that we could debate that very easily. Would we call that harm, or would we call that, what if there's an event that happens in the future? There comes a point where I don't want to parse out too many details on that. And I just want to get to, let's treat you for it. Now, if you want to call it real event for future, if you want to call it harm, whatever, it's treatable, and let's go down the road of treatment. Because sometimes people get stuck in these debates that, well, I can't really get treatment on it first till I know exactly what type it is. And so now I've got to spend a lot of hours figuring out the type, and only then can I go get treatment. Well, no, let's just do the treatment, because we know how to treat this. No matter what you're going to call it, we know how to treat it.
Yeah, you know what? It's a conversation I've had with a good friend of mine, Allegra Castens, who treats OCD. And one of the things that we've talked about, from lived experience is, and this is how I've looked at it, and you may look at it different. I think content matters in the beginning. And the reason I say that is because I know, like, when I dealt with some of my early subtypes, there wasn't a lot of guilt and shame there. I mean, there's embarrassment because I'd be at the store doing these compulsions, but ultimately it felt very external. I had to keep my mom safe, or I had to keep the world safe. But when it started getting into the harm and the sexual intrusive thoughts, I started experiencing much different emotions, a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of disgust. And I didn't identify it as OCD right away, because I always thought OCD was anxiety. So once I kind of recognized, like, hey, in this subtype, you might experience more of this, or a compulsion of mine, which I hear a lot from my clients with real event OCD, false memory OCD, is like self-punishment. I hit somebody with my car and got away with it. Why would I order avocado on my Chipotle, besides the fact that you have to give a lung and it's $4.87 extra? But like, why would I have those perks? Or why would I go to the movie tonight when I've sexually assaulted someone or hurt somebody in the past? And so it was important for me at first to recognize, like, all these new kind of experiences could still be OCD. But like you just said, once I started getting into the treatment and getting going, I really stopped worrying as much about content, because I started to see that all of the subtypes I was experiencing was the same thing. The doubt was around something different, but it was the same mechanics. It's like if you own 4 cars, which I clearly don't, I barely own one. But it's like, if you own 4 cars, it's not like you have to, like, oh, today I'm driving this car, I have to get in a different mindset and take new classes and learn. It's like, no, I'm driving the cars all the same.
Yeah. So, can I tangent that just for a moment, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you?
Unless you're telling me that you're getting a Tesla, so I could have 2 cars, and I could use that as my example.
Yes. You get a car, and you get a car, and in your heyday of OCD, Chris, could you have ever punished yourself enough?
No.
Okay.
I punished myself more than somebody who really did the things that I did. Society punished less than I punished myself. For sure.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell my clients. It's like, because some people will come in. I mean, I worked with somebody who in the 80s, he assumed he did something, and this was in, 2015. And so for 35 years, he had punished himself for a potential thing he might have done. And it's like, but in real life, you would have been punished less than what you've self-punished yourself. And you just made a good point. There is never going to be an end. unless you do the treatment. You're never going to punish yourself enough and then wake up one day and be like, okay, from that past event or real event, etc., I'm now good. I hit the mark.
I think it's such an important message that we get across today to people, that there isn't an end to OCD, because you can't take OCD through enough for it to finally come to a conclusion. The only end to OCD is being able to walk away from OCD. My nerdiest example of this, and if you'll indulge me for 1 minute on it, my absolutely nerdiest example of this is Star Trek. And there's a scene where Commander Data, who's an android, is playing a game of stratagema against the person who's the best at the game in the entire universe. Now, Data as an android is the most powerful, smart thing ever created, and he loses the game to this person. And so Data spends the entire episode running self-diagnostics on himself, trying to figure out, there must be a problem with my programming. I don't lose. I've never lost anything. I've never been outsmarted or outwitted or anything whatsoever by anything. And so at the end, you see the two of them playing again. And the guy playing Data is getting more and more frustrated, more and more and more. And eventually he throws down his controllers and he says, "You're making a mockery of this." And he walks out. And everybody says, "Data, you won. You beat him." And he says, "No, I didn't beat him." "Well, what did you do?" He said, "I played to a draw." We can't beat OCD. We're not going to try. But we can get OCD to a draw and to be so frustrated that it's like, heck with this, I'm done. And that's how you win.
Yeah. No, for sure. That was a brilliant example. I will say, when you said nerdy, I didn't know we were going to go Star Trek nerdy. So next time we need Skyla to put up a little warning, like, this is about to get super nerdy. But I will say my dad is a Star Trek fan, so he used to make us watch Star Trek. And I will say, sometimes it was cool. And I know who Data is, and he was awesome. So was he with the one that did this?
That was the Vulcan Mr. Spock, by the way.
Okay, so clearly I'm versed on my Star Trek. Okay, we're gonna walk away. Emily has a good question at 12:17. My false memory OCD intensifies when drinking. Even if I have one beer and remember everything, my mind will convince me I blacked out and did something awful and don't remember. So can you talk a little bit about that correlation with drugs, with alcohol, with recreational stuff? Because that's definitely something I hear a lot with this.
Sure. So one of the things that can happen when drinking is drinking lowers your inhibitions. So if you've built up inhibitions to your OCD, those can be decreased when you take in certain substances. So then what do other people do? Sometimes they take other substances to counteract those substances. So then that goes away. We see this in trauma. Like, I know people who have experienced a trauma and have nightmares, so they take cocaine all the time so they stay awake because they don't want to sleep and have the nightmares. I've seen other people with trauma who hate the flashbacks, so they drink a lot of alcohol and use a lot of marijuana so they sleep all the time so they don't experience the flashbacks during the day. So if there's anything that weakens your resolve against OCD, and it could be drinking, it could be drugs, but there's also people who say, when I get tired, my OCD gets worse, right?
Yeah.
Some people say it's worse in the morning because I'm just not quite all there and don't have all my faculties. Other people say it's worse at night when I'm going to bed, and then my head hits the pillow and then my brain's like, boop, and it just turns on and it runs and it runs and it runs, right? So everybody has different things that might play a role in their inhibitions to OCD occurrence and what maybe raises or lowers those things.
Yeah. I'm going to get into some more since I'm looking at the time. We have Adam at 12:51. How in the past does your worry have to be considered false memory or real event? I have a problem with doubting whether or not I did the right amount, and I will always say, I better be sure, and I go back and do more. Sometimes it can be again and again like a stuck record. Outdated analogy, I know. So.
Yeah. How far in the past? I think 0.00001 millisecond would be probably how far in the past it would have to be for you to start doubting. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the other thing that I would say is where he talks about, like, did I do the right amount? Remember, there's not enough for OCD, like you were saying. The other thing that I always tell my clients, because sometimes I even forget how to live a non-OCD life because it was such a big part of my life, but my friends don't have OCD. because everybody with those, no, I'm just kidding. Could you imagine? I'm like, no, never talk to you. But no, like there's like, we can't both have OCD. No, but I have friends with anxiety and other stuff. But my friends who don't have OCD, it's like they either know or they don't know. They're never like eating food at a restaurant and they're like, do I like this or do I not like this? They're never like get home and be like, did I hit someone or did I not? They just know. They either hit someone, they either did something or they didn't. And I think that that's what we don't get with OCD. And I see Adam's question. It's like how much is the right investigation to get to that conclusion? And the answer is 0, because if you did something, you would know. There wouldn't be this confusion or this mystery around it.
Yeah. But there's always the what if that OCD loves. Yeah. And then what if has a cousin, which is but what if, right? And those two love to show up at a party and take a poop in the punch bowl,
Yeah,
and just ruin everything. So
yeah, I would definitely cancel my party if somebody pooped in my punch bowl. I love how you said punch bowl. It's like the good 90s movies where there's always a punch bowl at the prom and somebody spikes it, and then it's a true 90s movie. Thank you, Paula. She says we're a great partnership on this subject. Look out for our merch coming soon. There's a delay on it because Patrick and I are arguing who goes first. I think it should be based on alphabet. C comes before P. You said wisdom. I said beauty. So it went back to C to P. So we're still fighting it out.
I have a face for radio, so you win the beauty side, but
I have a voice for torture. So somebody told me that once. I was like, thanks. Way to boost my ego. Jackie Chapin, who if it's the Jackie, I think I absolutely admire all the work you do, would love some example. And I saw this question a lot, would love some examples of exposure therapy for real event OCD. So what would be an example of some ERP or some exposures that you'd work through with a client?
Well, a lot of it is not doing things that they've been doing before, right? So sometimes you can purposely do ERP to have someone go and say, with a contamination, touch something and not wash. But in this instance, it's we're going to ban you from driving down that road again so that you can check one more time if there's pieces of car bumper, right? You are not to drive down that road for the next week. And we're going to see how it feels to not have done that over time. And you will probably see your anxiety go up but just once, if I could just check one more time, if I could just one more bit of reassurance, then I'll feel really confident in it. And then you'd of course need another one. So many times my ERP work is having people go out and live the life that they want to live and do the things that they've been afraid to do because they have a false memory associated with it, but maybe in a different venue or way than they've done it before, so they don't have a chance to circle back and check the old thing that might have happened.
Yeah, and Jackie, what I would say as well is like what's been helpful for my clients is I ask, like, what do you restrict in your life because of the shame and guilt you feel from the past event? And I'll have clients that says, I've always wanted a cat, but I just don't deserve it, or things like that. And it doesn't seem like an exposure, but I've had a client like buy a new pair of shoes and they've broken down. It was like really difficult for them because of the past events and feeling like they've gotten away with something bad. And that's what I hear a lot with a subtype. Then they, get the shoes and suddenly it's like, I feel guilty wearing these shoes. So it's really starting to restrict that. The other thing that I do is, a lot of times if somebody, has a fear, like a past fear that they hit somebody, with their car and things like that, I'll ask them to kind of like trigger the thoughts and stuff is like, what do you think your victim could have become? What are they doing? What would they have been doing right now? What would their life look like if you hadn't hit them with their car? And that can be really, really triggering. And the goal is not to obviously torture the client, is to finally start going there. And with my own OCD experience is like, it never felt like torture because I worked up with my therapist in a way that it wasn't overwhelming. But it wasn't torturous to go there because it was like, God, for so long, the second the thought came up, I went to compulsion, that I never let myself just kind of think it through. And then when you start to do that, that's when a client is starting to come up short with answers. And it's easier for them to see like, oh my God, I just realized that my brain has made up this whole alternative universe where I've hit somebody with my car, got away with it, should be in jail, but I'm not. And as I'm talking to you about it, Chris, and kind of going there, I realized like, I don't even have any evidence that this thing even happened. And I've been living this alternative kind of world that's not even coming from any basis of fact.
You hit it on the head, Chris. I mean, and what I always like about doing these with you is you are brutally honest about your lived experience, which I appreciate so very much, because there's something about hearing it from me. And I got a compliment last night that said, you talk about OCD as if you actually have it. So to me, you couldn't get a better compliment than that as a therapist. So I was really appreciative of that. But I do like the fact that, we can bounce things off of each other, and they're hand in glove in the way we talk about it. So that's great. And I think so inspiring for people who are on here who have OCD, who can see you and know that there's a way out and that you can be successful. And you will never say, I don't have OCD anymore, right? Mm-hmm. You have just gone through and figured out, how do I live with the fact that I have OCD?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, I don't know if real event or false memory OCD was ever like the major subtypes. I always feel like when I hear about these, I'm like, okay, I had slight things in a lot of it, not everything. And for me, what I would find whenever, I think of it as like time traveling with this subtype. You're going back in time, et cetera. And what I ask clients to do, and what I did in my own work, is it's like I took a passive approach. OCD wanted me to wake up in the morning with a breakfast cereal and be like, okay, what is our plan to figure out if I hit somebody with my car a long time ago? Or if I when I broke up with my first ex, was I really rude and messed up their whole life, or whatever the false memory? Because somebody asked, could it be any subtype? Yes, it could be anything, not only harm. But OCD wants you to sit, and it's your turn to wake up that morning and be like, I'm just not today. You know what? I'm taking the day off. I'm not going to try to ruminate. I'm not going to try to figure something out. I'm not going to try to explore, get reassurance. I'm just not. I'm going to take a passive approach, a day off. I know that means we're one day behind in coming to our conclusion, and I'm going to be okay with that because I can't today. And when you do less, that response prevention, then that's when the clarity and the reality starts to come in.
You got it. Yeah.
So before we go, I want you to tell people, because somebody asked about how they can see your live stream. So tell us a little bit about, obviously, what you do, the live streams, like where people could find you and all the work that you're doing to help people get OCD treatment.
Absolutely. Well, you can download the NoCD app. That's the simplest thing that anybody could do. And when you do that and sign in, you'll get some push notifications about when our lives go on. We've got Jenna Overbaugh who does them. We have various other people. Katie joined us this week. Katie O'Dunn was on. And I do most Wednesday nights, I do a live webinar from 7 to 8 Central on there as well, too. So please check us out. We also have a NoCD YouTube page where you can see all of the past webinars that I've done and others have done as well. So if you love these kind of Q&A experiences, we would love to have you watch those and to get more education about that as well, too. Because Chris and I are all here for the same thing, and the International OCD Foundation as well, to get that education out there and let people learn more and more about OCD so that it doesn't have to be in control of their lives anymore. We also... Well said. One other thing, and NoCD's got a teletherapy network across the U.S., and we're in Canada and the U.K. and Australia as well, too. So you can check us out if you're interested in that at nocd.com.
Really well said. So you're not allowed to have favorites, but you're definitely one of my favorites to have on the stream. So thank you so much. It's like children, right? I can't, somebody else is going to watch and be like, I was on the stream. What are you saying? But no, you're absolutely one of my favorites. Thank you so much. Like I said, merch coming soon. We're just fighting over the design, but we'll get it out. But in all seriousness, if you come to the July conference, please, check it out on the iocdf.org website. Come say hi to us. We love meeting people. It's definitely one of those kind of vibes. I'm going to be excited to see Patrick. Definitely check us out at the conference in July. Make sure you hit up NoCD. If you felt like we didn't get to your question, I was trying to get to as many questions as I could. Don't forget, you can always go to iocdf.org/peace of mind. And there you can submit a question. You can submit a topic that you want. Also, we have this great worker at the IOCDF named Skyla. So she's going to go through and grab some of those questions. And Liz and I have the sheet of all the questions we don't get to. And then we make sure to address them. And we'll be back next Wednesday for another Ask the Expert. So all those questions I didn't get to today, or Jackie, if you want more examples of exposures for real event, false memory, please come back. We'll definitely get to those. Thank you so much for everybody to be at the live stream. This would not happen if we didn't have the audience that we had. Make sure everybody heads over to iocdf.org for all of your OCD education and resource needs. Come see us at the conference. And Patrick, have an amazing rest of your day. And so does everybody else. And subscribe.
Thanks,
subscribe to everything. Everything subscribe. Beth says subscribe. You subscribe. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Awesome.